In this set of slides that I call lecture 4, I think, roughly corresponds to what's in the book in chapter 3 about encoding, how to encode. But I kind of take the view that we're going to look at for kind of start by dimensions. It's not 100%. Sometimes I talk about 2 dimensions, but the technique may actually work for 3 or 4 dimensions as well. So we'll go from unidimensional, multidimensional things. We'll talk about some of the things there, talk about linked histograms. One thing that we already see in Easy Chooser is able to do multiple dimensions. So when we move to multiple dimensions, I may point back Easy Chooser. It's something that we could use for more dimensions, and then talk about all of these techniques. They, if you want, they kind of tend to be more boring in the beginning. They're more statistics oriented. They're more, if you want, precise, unbiased. And then they get more exciting towards the end and less clear. So if anything, so we'll kind of go through all of these. Let's discuss a single value. What if I want to present just the altitude of an airplane? Kind of, this is the old display on the left. And we can see it looks like a clock. So we're above 10,000 feet, and this is 3,000, and then this is 400 and something. So we're at about 13,000 feet, and then 460, 450. So 13,450, that's what that particular thing represents. Here's kind of a newer view of the same. You have a tape display, you have an electronic display. They don't want to do steam gauges, display round. And this shows the altitude is somewhere, 1,810. Which one do you think it's better? I don't know. Personally, pre-attentively, actually, there's a big advantage to the one that's really old. And here's what's the advantage. If you're flying kind of normally, and the air traffic controllers, they tend to give you either even 1,000 altitude, so you say 3,000 feet or 14,000 feet, or they give you 500. They say you fly at 4,500 feet. Rarely they kind of, unless you get close to an airport, then they start treating you, kind of giving you more precise altitudes. But otherwise, most of the time, you're going to be at either 1,000 or 500, even numbers. So what this means, if you look at the display on the left, means that this big line here is either going to be straight up or straight down. And that can be done pre-attentively. You can see small deviations without having to read anything. You can see it's no longer straight. It's not pointing straight down. It's not pointing straight up. It's a little bit tilted. Pre-attentive, we can determine kind of something that's a weird angle. So that, in a way, may be easier. It's harder to figure out now. It took me a while to figure out that I'm at 10,000 here and then 3,000 here. That part may be harder to do in the old display, but just sticking to one altitude, it's easier to see if you're deviating. On this one, it's not that easy. Especially if you're in the 500s, they didn't put a click here. So if it's even thousands, then yes, because you're going to align them. But if you need to go to 500, it's going to be hard to tell if you deviate a little bit. So it can be a couple of pixels up and down. So the only way you can see if you deviated, you're going to have to read the display. And then reading, as I was telling you, it's not necessarily pre-attentive. You have to pay attention to what you're reading. So there's advantages, disadvantages to the two of them, but I would, don't discard the old one, because pre-attentively, being straight up and straight down is really important. And you don't even have to focus. It's just going to bother you in the corner of your eye. You don't even have to look at it straight to see that you're off a little bit. So that was just a single value that was displayed, that whole discussion. So now let's move. What if I have a single dimension? So I'm just, let's say, taking, percentages of, I look outside and see how percentages of, try to guesstimate maybe, or even measure somehow. But look at percentages of trees that have no leaves versus percentage that has some leaves left on them. It's winter. So it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 1. And so you would think that it's just one number that you're, one dimension, a number. What can go wrong with a single number? So why not just use one axis and then start plotting stuff on top of it? And actually, I can't see anything on this one. I'm not sure if it's something when it got imported. Something happened when it got imported, but let's say for the sake of the argument, you see a number, a dot here. Okay? There's some of, you can see it barely, some black dots over there. But what if you see a black dot there? How many data values are there? That's the problem. You don't know. I can have, maybe I've done this measurement every day and it's the same number of trees. So is it one value or is it 10 values that fit in the same dot? They may be on top of each other. So just using a single axis, not enough. Not even that is easy. If you just do it straight, just start telling the computer, put a dot over there. Because you don't know if you have dots on top of each other. So how do you use this idea of a Taki box? And I've seen variations, and I may be wrong, but you have to read kind of what Taki box you're actually using in your software. But what the box shows, again, is just one axis. This axis has really no meaning. So the box can be thinner or wider. It won't have any meaning like that. So the things that you're seeing here, the line, the middle line, it's the median value. So half of the values are going to be above that line, the other half below that line. You don't know how far below, but you have half. The dot here, that's the average, your normal average that you would do. This one normally is the 75 percentile. So it means that 75% of the values are below that line, 25% are on top. The other line here, the whisker, that looks like a whisker, that's normally the 95 percentile. Again, only 5% of data is on top of it. This one is really close, but this one is a little bit further. This is the 5% and the 25. So basically that's what you're seeing, 5, 25, 50, 75, and 95. Data points that are above the 95 or below the 5, they're normally displayed as dots. Again, there's no guarantee that you don't have two dots on top of each other, but it's only 5% of the data. And that's pretty much it. That's a Taki box. It just shows you the average and then percentiles. It generally doesn't, the average is the little dot in the middle. That most people think, when we do statistics, we think of average, but in the Taki box looks more, where are the data, where are the numbers in what boxes? So basically between here and here, you have 25% of the data. Yes?
In this case, it has to be a normal distribution every time.
Why? No.
Normal, is this a right skewed or a left skewed?
You would see the box would look different.
So it will show automatically?
Yes. I have more boxes coming up. No. Typically, it doesn't represent anything. Now, some of the... I know there was a paper that had something like a Taki box there, but I don't think that was a Taki box that we looked at. It was more a compare where the data was distributed. Well, it was kind of like that, 5%, 95%. They usually sometimes just put the whiskers there. But it's more for calculation. Here is histogram. It was kind of coming up in those 25 ways to view the same data. So the idea of the histogram is that I use 2 dimensions to represent unidimensional data. So the dimension I want to represent is the temperature. And the thing that I'm showing here is just a counter. So that's a count. Count Dooku from Star Wars. No, it's count like count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many? So you can see here that this probably is just between 13 and 13 and a half degrees. There's only one data point because that's the height of the bar. Between 13 and a half, this bar here, between 13 and a half and 14 degrees, it looks like I have 2 days, 2 data points in there. So basically, you looking at it, you can kind of guesstimate. If now I can even count probably to the level of 1, but sometimes the scale here is maybe thousands, so I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly to the 1, but I can tell you to whatever scale they're using. And then let me delete here. So this one, it looks like there's 5 values of data points that fall between 14 and 14 and a half, and so forth. So it's kind of like it does the same thing that a Taki box wants to do. It tells you about how your data looks like. It can be skewed. It can be right in the middle. This is skewed a little bit. It kind of goes up really fast, and then it falls down not as so it's being Helsinki, maybe they're on the cold side a little bit. There's more days on the cold side than in the middle. So that's what a histogram does. Now, each bar, and actually that's true even for the Taki box. If you look at the Taki box as a mark, kind of going back to when talking about spatial substrate and marks and so forth, a Taki box can represent 3 data points or can represent 3 million data points. It's just one graphical attribute for, if you think about the data being in rows, for any number of rows. Same thing is true about a histogram. A bar here, this one that I've singled out here, looks like it represents 5 entries. There's 5 days that they measure temperature being in that range. So if you look inside my data, you will see 5 rows. So I was telling you when we were discussing about marks and graphical objects that sometimes, I was kind of trying to keep it simple. I say it's a 1-to-1. It's not always a 1-to-1 correlation. I may have one graphical object, one mark, represent many rows. And when that happens, call that aggregation. So I basically take, instead of representing one row becomes one data point, one graphical mark, I may decide that I don't have enough space, or for whatever reason, I'm just going to combine them, and I may have one graphical mark represent a million. And that really helps when I have lots of data. If I have more data than pixels, what am I going to do? I have to use aggregations if my data is really large. There's no other way to display it. I don't even have enough pixels. So now I'm moving to 2 dimensions. That was just 1 dimension, all that discussion. So I was using almost 2 dimensions to represent 1. So it's not that easy even with 1. Why? Because I can have overlap. That's what's causing trouble. If I have 2 dimensions, obviously one thing I can do is do easy chooser. You kind of have the image right here. But I could do box plots, more than one. So I can use Taki boxes and have more than one for each entry. So here's an example of birth rate, again, in Finland. Apparently, when I looked at Taki box plots, I found something about Finland. And you can see some of the box plots are really thin, so otherwise are really kind of stretched out. So what are the 2 data dimensions? One is the birth rate. The other one is the province in Finland. Okay, so I can see the distribution between birth rates and where the averages fall, where most of the data falls, and probably this is over the years, or there's more than one entry in there, but I don't know the year. I don't know how they did it, but it's just birth rate. Another one, spaghetti view. So this, in this case, it's a time series. So one dimension is time. And if you remember Tufte, you know, if you have time, that almost technically you're showing dynamics. Not sure if any dynamics is specifically shown here, but technically it's there because I have time. So what they're showing here is various stock prices over time. So it's the price of the stock and time. And you kind of see the spaghetti view. Here are some things I can do kind of going back. It has nothing to do with representation, it's more interaction. I could use kind of draw a rubber band, just like you select multiple files, you know, when you draw a rubber band, and select stocks that were in this price range at this time, and then they were in this price range at this time, and these are all the ones. Maybe get rid of some of the spaghettis and do filtering. But that's just one way of doing it out of many. Yes?
What application would you work on like that? Did I take a snap and find out?
Later on, we're going to talk about parallel coordinate plots. It can work like that. I don't know. This is not the particulars. I don't know. There's probably software that does something like this, but I don't know it off the top of my head. This is not necessarily implemented. It's more of an idea. It may have been implemented. I actually don't know, but not that it's publicly available. Not that I ever used it. The reason I have this one here, it's yes, there's two dimensions, and I think it shows ozone in Los Angeles. One of the dimension is time. The other is the ozone. But what I like about it is that they grouped it in a logical way. So you can see the year. They have each year is one block. And then you have the months of the year. Another kind of going that way. So it's a two-dimensional data, but my visualization is not two-dimensional. They kind of use small multiples to repeat the block for each year. And then they kind of group it by month. And then here is probably time of day. And you can look at ozone. You can see in the summer there's a lot more. It's pretty obvious it's right in the middle than in the winter months. And it's increasing. It seems like it's increasing because there's a lot more oranges, I think, in the middle. So that's what you can see. The idea here being that they grouped they kind of broke down one dimension into smaller parts, so it makes more sense. It's logically the ozone would be affected by time of the year and by time of day and so forth. It doesn't look to be that affected by time of day, but if you look at each individual one, it's not necessarily, I see much of a difference going up and down within one box. So that's the reason I had this one here. Here's another way. If I want to do, and here is, the reason I have this is to introduce this idea of semantic zooming. So one kind of zoom I can do is what you do with a picture on your phone. You zoom in and you zoom out. Nothing changes. I mean, yes, the pixels become smaller, pixel becomes bigger. But I can do zooming where at some level, once I reach a certain level, I change completely the representation. I don't have to stick with making it larger. So if you look on the left side, there is no name. It's not like I see the name Ford smaller. It's not even there. It's more what you get on maybe a map application. If you look at the entire United States, you don't see Pine Bluff. represent there. If you zoom in and get into the central Arkansas area, you start seeing Pine Bluff. So it's not like Pine Bluff was really small and you couldn't see it. It wasn't there at all. They just changed the representation. And sometimes this semantic zooming can be very dramatic. It's not, I don't have to just add a label. I can add the picture of the car now. Show up, make the picture show up a little bit. So that's the main reason I have this here, but there's two dimensions here. The second dimension is the manufacturer. The first one, I think, is what? A price. So I have the price on one axis, and the second dimension, the manufacturer, will show up if I zoom in kind of through semantic zooming. Now moving